So this is really happening. What an exciting moment for your student and hopefully for you too. They're going to college and you are not, or at least not with them. But congratulations to both you and them on getting to this place. Now the question is, how do you keep it going? What comes next? How do you manage this transition? And then how do you maintain the momentum for the next 4 years? We're here to share 4 key pieces of advice in hopes that they will help as you and your student take these next steps. So let me start by acknowledging that your students are certainly the center of our concern, but we also recognize that you are dealing with a big change. This might be the first time you're leaving your child or your student to live away from home. Or maybe it's the last time you'll be dropping someone off to college. Perhaps all of this feels new, or maybe you're a pro at it. Either way, it's still a shift for everyone involved. So the advice we're about to share is as much for you as it is for your student. As these young adults move into this new space, literally and figuratively, they're going to need your ongoing support. However, how you help them should start to look different. You've directed much of what's happened to get them to this point. Now, as they're coming into their own, you get to step back from that director's role. Now they get to shape the story they're trying to tell. They get to start directing the movie, so to speak. One of the best things you can do for them is to let them take on this increasing responsibility for their movie, which is not to say that it's a solo production. Everyone still has a role to play. Those roles are changing and adapting to new developments, though. And so as you move into your changing role, consider these 4 ideas and share them with your students. First, welcome the questions. Second, do the learning. Third, be the community. And fourth, breathe through it. So first, let's welcome the questions. We've all got questions. Think about how many you've heard, answered, and asked just in the last 24 hours, let alone in the last 2 or 3 months of getting ready for today. We might get tired of them, but they sure have a way of showing up. Questions can be frustrating, especially for high-achieving people like your students, who are used to knowing the answers right away and being on top of everything. Having questions can make us feel dumb and embarrassed, to put it bluntly, and having someone ask us questions can be stressful and nerve-wracking. The reality, however, is that questions just come with the territory. We're going to live in the world. We're going to have questions. So let's welcome them as evidence that we're alive and paying attention. So when your student calls home worried about all the things they don't know yet, remind them that they should have questions. They don't need to feel like they're somehow failing when they don't know it all. So we start with accepting that we have questions. Still, questions alone won't get us far enough. At some point, we need answers. But all questions are not created equal. By that, I just mean that every question doesn't require the same kind of attention, the same kind of answer. Knowing how to approach the question is critical. That requires understanding the kind of question we're facing. So remind your students that part of their job is learning how to make sense of their questions. What do they really need to know? Is it basic information that a Google search can provide? An academic question that they should talk to their professor about? Something that will help them get to know someone very different from them? Knowing what kind of question they're asking will help them determine the best place to go get the answers they need. Likewise, knowing how to interpret the questions that others are asking of them will pay off as well, from achieving academic success to building healthy relationships to discovering new passions and possibilities. Let me make a quick point about resources. Encourage your student to take advantage of the numerous offices and people who are here to assist them. Remind them as well to find credible sources that are appropriate for the question, knowing that they shouldn't get all of their information from just one place. And remind yourself that you don't need to be their primary or go-to source. Ask instead, whose question is this? Who actually needs to answer it? Chances are it's your student. So let them do the work. That's how they'll learn, and they'll be better for having done it. A final word about all of this. Things are changing. Change always generates questions. Sometimes those questions are pretty straightforward and just require us to do a little information gathering. Sometimes, though, we find ourselves asking difficult questions, things that challenge us to re-examine much of what we thought we knew, our relationships, our identities, our beliefs and values, our fears, our hopes, our dreams. Your student is going to have these big, tough questions, probably sooner rather than later. Don't be afraid to let them wrestle with them. Instead, teach them to welcome these opportunities to learn and grow. Help them remember that change brings questions, and the right questions can lead to the best kinds of change as well.
Yeah, so I really like what you said, Erica, about, questions abound, they are everywhere. And inside the classroom, outside the classroom, I would say one of the things that I'd really, want our parents and families to know and try to help their students lean into is this notion of reflection, which is, in many ways is just asking yourself questions. Yep. And it leads into this idea of writing your own story, being the director in your own film or whatnot. So I'd really encourage families to prompt their students for that kind of internal reflection and prompt them to ask themselves questions like, what am I noticing here? What's happening? What did I learn from this? That will, I think, help them do that reflective work and move forward rather than sort of getting stuck in more of a static notion. So I love their questions are everywhere, and there's a lot of questions inside ourselves. We want to prompt that reflection. It's a great practice. I think it's also a great practice for families to do on their own.
So when you're thinking about asking questions, it prompted me to think about in the classroom. And when I say at the end of a class, does anyone have questions? There's sometimes the kid in the front row who's like, me. But also students think, ooh, I have questions, but maybe it's not a good question. Mm-hmm. And we know there's no dumb questions. But when we frame it not as, do you have a question, but what questions do you have? I think that's something parents can ask, when they get the phone call, get the text message, what questions are you asking about this situation? And also, of course, who's the right person to ask this question rather than, not just, do you have questions, but what questions do you have about the situation, about this class, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really important.
Okay, so our next piece of advice for your students, and by extension for you, is to do the learning. Obviously, learning will happen. That's why your student is here. And clearly, learning will take place in the classroom, as it did for me, a child of the 80s, and probably did for you too. But at Wake Forest, learning is so much more than what happens in the classroom. We hope your students will choose to study abroad and maybe pursue an academic internship. They may join a faculty research project or partner with a community nonprofit in their new city. And these are all learning opportunities, as is living in community with students who are both like and unlike them. So in this process of learning, you learn when you step into the gap between what you know and what you need to know. Recognize the gaps and practice stretching yourself to build the bridges across them. When students enter my classroom, they typically have some base knowledge to build on. Then together, we fill in the gaps, and that's when the most exciting learning happens. Learning requires effort, time, and courage. Commit yourself to the process, and the outcomes, even the ones you weren't expecting, will be more rewarding than you think. Learning also takes many forms. Learning about yourself, your community, and the world in general. You can't know it all, and you won't get it right all the time. Failing is part of the adventure. And it gives you opportunities to practice the stretch, to try again, to make different choices, to discover new paths and possibilities. So don't waste those chances. As your student discovers new paths and makes changes, they may even change a major or a minor, perhaps even more than once. They and you should know that a major doesn't dictate every step along the way, and in fact, it doesn't even determine your career. Learning and growth will take place throughout the next 4 years and beyond. Our goal at Wake Forest is to help students develop into graduates who are lifelong learners.
One of the things I really appreciated about what you were reminding us about doing the learning is that it happens everywhere. It doesn't have to be just in the classroom. In fact, if it's only in the classroom, it's not enough, right? So I thought that was a really important reminder that students should be open to all kinds of possibilities.
And I think that was always the case, even when we middle-aged-ish people were in school. But that has certainly changed, or if not changed, become more prominent.
Yeah.
And I think we're being more intentional about opportunities for students outside the classroom in ways that emphasize this is part of learning in a holistic way, both inside and outside.
On that note, thinking about learning where it takes place, and to emphasize your point about learning through failure, I can't emphasize that enough, and probably I'll happy to share a story about some learnings that I had in college. But a couple of items for parents especially is when your student makes a mistake, when they fall down, above all else, I think your student wants you. I know your student wants you, and I think it's important to remind them that you care about them, you support them unconditionally, regardless of the mistake or the outcome, and to help them process through that failure. Again, prompting some questions of, well, what are you going to do differently next time to avoid a similar outcome? I remember when a brief moment of vulnerability, when I was a college student, I applied to be an RA. I will again state I'm the Dean of Residence Life and Housing.
That's an important career trajectory.
Yeah, right. And I didn't get it. I didn't get the job. I was a sophomore, and I went in to speak with the then version of me, and I asked some questions about what I really wanted this job, and I'm disappointed. I'm going to come back next year and apply. What can I do differently to put myself in a better position to do that? So just an example of failure is going to happen. How can you prompt your student to, again, support them, care about them, and also help them learn through that failure?
It's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
Look at where I am now.
One of the greatest opportunities that comes from living and learning within a residential college environment is our chance to create and sustain an inclusive sense of community. Here at Wake, that rests upon our university motto, Pro Humanitate. We know that one of the core ways for us to truly be for humanity is when every deacon has full access to all that we have to offer, and they experience a sense of belonging in their living, their learning, and their thriving for themselves and others. Our commitment is that community exists for everyone, across race and ethnicity, religion and spirituality, ability, gender, sexual orientation, and even socioeconomic status for starters. Being a deacon means fully embracing the richness of identity and experience that comes along with each of us. Now that your student has become a deacon, they will be asked to do 3 things, and we'll need your support and your partnership to help in each of these. Being a part of a diverse and inclusive community will require them to commit, to reflect, and to bridge. Let's begin with commit. Inclusive living and learning communities happen when each of us makes a commitment to a lifelong process of discovery, learning, and putting into practice what we've learned, particularly when we do that in ways that are in service to the full range of ideas, beliefs, and experiences that are part of the community. It doesn't happen by chance or only as the result of us being generally good people. Inclusive communities happen as a set of intentional choices about our beliefs, our values, our actions, and how we allow those to shape our decisions and behaviors. We need each DEEC to take ownership over how their presence at Wake Forest will make this a healthy and inclusive space for themselves and other students, faculty, and staff members. As parents and family, we want to ask you and want you to ask your student what commitments they're willing to make in service to the full breadth of this community, to their personal identity development, and the identity experiences of those around them. Just by being here, they will help give shape to this space. So encourage them to decide how they will be intentional about the impact they make and the mark that they leave. And they will likely need to decide and commit many times over the course of their journey. So be patient and supportive as they move through this process. Let's think about reflection. Throughout their time at Wake, your student will be invited to actively reflect upon their own ways of knowing and being in this world, and to also explore and lean into lots of other ways of knowing and being. How have they come to understand themselves, others, and the world around them? And in what ways have they done that? What are the values that they hold dear, and how do they demonstrate those? How are their understandings serving them well? And where are the places they might want to consider doing something different? How do they understand and demonstrate understanding for social identities, particularly those that may be different from their own? What makes them feel respected, valued, cared for, and that they matter? How do they help others to feel those same things? So how can you help? Give your student the space and reminders to explore these questions and be an open and non-judgmental space for them to share what they're pondering, what they're learning about themselves, and the world around them. Encourage them to learn and reflect on how their ability to navigate the world may look very different from someone else's ability to show up in the world by the name they choose to use, the pronouns they identify with, the fiscal resources they may have access to, or the biases associated with the color of their skin, the physical or intellectual accommodations they may need to participate in class or in programs, their political affiliations, the religion they practice, their cultural identity, or their country of origin, or even the language that they speak. Each of these aspects of our identity and many more shape how we make sense of this world, how others often make sense of us, and how we get to show up. So encourage your student to explore and reflect on the questions like these, and to be an open space to hear what they're processing. Remind them of the resources available to support them, such as the courses that they can take as part of the cultural diversity requirement, identity development programs that we offer through our Intercultural Center, our Women's Center, and our LGBTQ+ Center, and even our RIDE Framework Toolkit, which has a host of resources. So reflection is critical for shaping our worldview. But we also ask our students to actively connect with others based upon what they're learning and what they are still seeking to learn. This can include actively engaging across difference. So go to lunch or go to a campus event with someone from a different background. Engage in a study group with new and different people. Join student organizations that have diverse membership. They can also participate in campus and community cultural events. Throughout the year, we have Heritage Months, including Native American, women, Asian, Latinx, Black history. There's even campus celebrations like World Cultural Festival and the East Asian Spring Festival. All students are welcome to informally or formally connect with our identity centers as spaces for community building, to join or support identity groups and clubs. But also within the classroom and their student organizations, encourage them to seek out different and underrepresented voices, even in leadership. Your students are deacons because they are among the best and the brightest, and we're counting on them to contribute to a successful and inclusive community for everyone. The ways that they choose to show up here and bridge with others will lay the foundation for the compassion, the empathy, and the trust that are needed in this living and learning community and our world. Ask your student what they've tried new, who they've met new, where they've been that's new, and what new and different perspectives they've encountered. When's the last time they meaningfully engaged with someone whose life journey is not a mirror of their own? Remind them that we are really only for humanity when each of us is willing to be intentional about how we create community for ourselves and in relationship with others. Know that their answers to these questions will not be static. Your student may not even know how they want to answer these questions today. Or they may be very clear on how they think about these questions today, but may evolve and change over the course of their first year or even the next 4 years. All of that is completely fine. We're not looking for conformity or agreement, but we are looking for deep curiosity, for them to learn to suspend their judgments and allow for deep understanding, and being able to demonstrate compassion. These are some of the qualities we'll lead your student in cultivating, and we'll need your help for them to flourish. Remember, we need you to encourage your young person to commit to exploration of themselves and others, to regularly reflect deeply upon how their words or actions contribute to the sense of belonging for others, how they can actively support everyone's ability to bring their authentic and best self to Wake Forest, and to bridge deeply and meaningfully across the richness of identities and experiences within this community. we welcome you to Wake.
So thanks, Malika. One thing that I was thinking about communities and how families can be involved in learning about the communities their students are becoming part of is, again, to ask questions. So ask questions about the community or probably communities that your student is becoming involved in. So leading questions that help them reflect, such as, how does this community make you feel about yourself? Is it one that's supportive? Are there challenges in this community? So is your student getting involved with a group that they want to be part of, but maybe it's not on a path that they want to go on? And so letting them reflect on that and think, is this really a community you want to be part of? And then also, where's their tension? And there's some learning that needs to happen. So are you meeting people in a community where it's not your normal, but it's in a good way of growing and stretching, and that would be beneficial?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that exploration is huge and so important about being in community is actually, doing some of the work to take part in the community. And I'd encourage your student to try something different than they did in high school. In the same way we're asking them to do that in the classroom, we want them to do that outside the classroom, and sort of doing that work to take part in the community. And that it's okay if they don't go deep. They might taste something and realize, again, no, I think I'm okay with this. I'm going to move on to a different path. The other thing I would note is that community can take time for students. I'll recount a story from one of my advisees a few years ago. He was struggling finding a friend group, and first-year student, and we were working through spring advising, and he was really excited because, through a random series of encounters, he had kept trying, but through this random occurrence, he found his people, and he was really excited. It took longer than he thought, but he kept working and looking for community, and just gave it time.
I think that's the thing. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Go ahead.
I think that's the thing, that doing the work to, again, be the community, that it involves actively engaging and recognizing that sometimes those communities are going to just come together naturally. And that's good. And sometimes they're going to come together naturally in ways that are maybe not great. And so thinking about how you might encourage your student to approach community as a place where they can have compassion and express compassion for everyone in the community, including themselves, and have a high standard, hold everyone to high expectations of what it means to be part of a community. And that's also including themselves. I think that's a big part of it, of how we make community on a regular, ongoing basis.
And that community may change over time. It may be that in the first year, it's your hall group, and that becomes very close, or first year seminar. And then maybe later in the 4 years, maybe it's a research lab that you join over the summer, and that's where you spend more of your time. And, it'll shift and morph, and maybe it's a study abroad experience, and that becomes, for a period of time, a very tight-knit community. So it doesn't have to be the same people that you track along with for 4 years, but it'll grow and develop.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing, maybe for parents too, that talking about all these communities that your student's in and is going to move between and among communities. You're part of a new community as well, Wake Forest parents. So encourage you to lean into what that is and learn from this community and how that other experiences can help inform your work as a parent. All right, everyone, let's take a deep collective breath. You've moved your student into their room, and you're soaking up a lot of information about their and your experience over the next few years. Breathe in, breathe out. So let's breathe in some new practices and exhale anything that served you well previously as parents, but that may not be useful anymore. Your student may be working through some challenging circumstances, and you may feel caught up in it with them. It's easy to want to jump in and fix it all for them, but your role is changing. You're moving away from a manager where you get to direct and tell your students what to do, and into a consultant role, prompting them with questions, encouraging learning and reflection, and supporting them. The questions, the learning, the people, it could take your breath away at some point, or many points. Sometimes in awe, sometimes in horror, sometimes in an uncomfortable combination of the two. I know your student is coming to Wake Forest with expectations about their experience. When our expectations match our experiences, things are predictable and our stress response is even. You have your own expectations as families. And I want you to think about how to help your student think about the best ways to manage stress when things don't turn out like they thought it would. And sometimes what your student wants from their college experience, their major, their friend group, summer internships, won't align with what you had in mind either. Instead of managing their experience to match yours, learn to manage your own emotions. Your student needs you to walk alongside them, which could be really hard considering how much you and they have at stake. If you were with us last night, you heard my advice to be good company for the journey on your students' authorship of their life and experience. The early years of the journey into adult life are particularly difficult because they are marked by transformation from reliance on someone else's authority, hint, that's you, to taking ownership and responsibility for their own lives. Two of the most important ways you can support your students' ability to write their own story are, one, give them autonomy. Please let them make their own decisions and their mistakes. Lean into that consultant role to prompt thinking rather than directing their choices. Also, respect them as adults. Sadly, or perhaps not so sadly, the days of changing diapers, packing lunches, and waiting for the bus are gone. Your children aren't children anymore. Respecting them as adults will help them be the authors of their own journey.
One of the things that you talked about, Matt, made me think back to something I said earlier, that this is the student's experience. The student is in college, and the parents are not, and how we really want to encourage parents to let students have their experience. When I think about that, it's connected to sort of being able to step back and take a deep breath when your student comes to you and tells you something that you were not prepared for, to be able to just sort of, okay, let me slow down for a moment, and let me ask them some questions and let me engage in a different kind of conversation with them. I think that's something that I think is important to remember, or important to help parents remember as you help your students go through these experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I think also along the lines of you have a new relationship where it's less parent managing child and more consulting. As I think about, the period of 18 to 22 is very formative. And there may have been things from your own 18 to 22-year-old experience that you have not yet shared with your students that might be appropriate now. So, it could be as simple as, I really struggled in this class, and I know I've come across to you as successful, but here's some of my failures along the way. Or here's a choice that I had to make that I wasn't happy with at the time, and how it has shaped me for who I am. So are there experiences of your own disappointment, of your own perceived failure at the time and growth that maybe have never come up in conversation, but now might be useful in that consulting role?
Yeah, I love what you said, Erica, about that returning to the student authoring their own experience, and some of, again, sort of breathing through what happens when your student's experience doesn't match either their expectations or yours, and some frequently I think we have these lists of things that I want in my student's experience, or these are things I expect. And sometimes you can't do all those things. So trying to breathe through the disappointment maybe of not being able to have a certain experience. Maybe it's studying abroad. Maybe it's participating with a faculty member doing research. Maybe it's a particular summer internship. But there are wonderful things that have shaped that student's story, your student's story, but again, maybe a particular chapter didn't make it to the final draft, the final version, but it's in the exploring, the doing, and letting your student craft and create that story that's really valuable.
If I can add just one final thing, when I think about breathing, it's like your body naturally breathes, right? Like we know how to breathe. And I think sometimes it's important to trust that process, right? Like trust that you have prepared your student has worked hard to be here, and all kinds of things are going to come up, but they are well equipped and are gaining more and more skills. And sometimes we have to just let it play out a little bit, and let it unfold. I don't mean just, throw up your hands and let anything happen, but think with your student about what does it mean to see their story unfold, and for them to be really active in that. I think that will make a big difference. It's a lot of work to do, but it's also a little bit natural to do some of this work. So.
Yeah, you've had 18-ish years to practice, kind of letting them go a little bit at a time. You don't hold on to the bike anymore, hopefully. And yet, so this is just another step along the way of the natural progression.